My name is Jason, and for a while I drove rideshare at night to cover my bills. I thought I had seen the worst people already. Drunk riders, people who tried to throw up out the window, couples fighting in the back seat, that kind of thing. But there was one ride last winter that still makes me feel sick when I think about it. It didn't end with a crash or a body or anything like that. It ended with something worse. It ended with me realizing that sometimes the scariest people are the ones who know who you really are. That night was slow. It was a Tuesday, close to the end of the month, and I was broke. The kind of broke where you start counting coins, and every ping on the app feels like oxygen. It was cold outside, and the wind was pushing small pieces of trash down the empty streets. I remember thinking the city felt abandoned, even though I knew there were thousands of people asleep all around me. I had already decided I would do just one more ride and then go home. That was when the app vibrated and showed a new request. The pickup point was on a side street I knew by name, but never by sight. Sycamore Road. There were no profile pictures, no ratings, nothing. Just the word user and a long-distance destination that would pay more than all my other rides that night combined. I hesitated. No picture and no rating usually meant a new account, and new accounts sometimes meant trouble. But I looked at my balance, and that was enough. I accepted the ride and followed the GPS. Sycamore Road looked worse than I expected. There were no houses, just the back of some warehouses, a chain-link fence, and a few broken streetlights. The GPS told me I had arrived, so I stopped near a dumpster and turned on my hazard lights. For a few seconds, nobody came. Then I saw a tall shape step out from the shadows near the fence. The person walked slowly toward my car. Not nervous, not rushed, just steady, like the whole situation was completely normal. He wore a long, dark coat and boots that made a dull sound on the cracked pavement. He got into the back seat, closed the door quietly, and sat right behind me. I smelled cold air and something like old cigarettes. He did not say hello, and I did not ask his name. I just started driving because that was my job. The first few minutes were silent except for the sound of the heater and the tires on the road. I checked the destination on the app again, and that was when I realized where it was sending me. It was taking us toward the town where I grew up. I had not been there in more than 15 years. My chest tightened a little, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. People still lived there, and rides could go anywhere. I tried to focus on the road and not on the memories that started to come back with every mile. I thought about asking the man if that address was correct, but before I could, he leaned forward slightly. I felt his presence behind me, and it made my shoulders tense up. He started talking then, in a calm, low voice. He said he knew I always drove at night and that I usually stopped around 2:30 in the morning. He mentioned that after my shift, I normally went home, heated leftovers, and watched something on my laptop until I fell asleep with the screen still on. He described my apartment building, the bad paint job in the hallway, and the way the lock on my front door sometimes stuck. So I often left it unlocked, telling myself I would fix it soon, but never doing it. He described all of this with no pauses, like he was reading from a file. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind started racing. I tried to remember if I had ever seen him before, in my building, at the store, anywhere. I could not. It would have been easy to ask him how he knew those things, but I didn't. I just gripped the steering wheel harder and let him talk. He went on and started talking about my schedule from earlier that week. He mentioned a day I had not worked, a day I stayed at home, lying on the couch most of the afternoon because of a headache. I realized then that whoever he was, he hadn't just looked at my social media or something simple like that. He had been watching me. That was the first moment I genuinely thought about pulling over and canceling the ride. But we were already on the highway. It was late, and the idea of stopping in the middle of nowhere with him behind me felt worse than just driving forward. So I kept going. The weather started getting worse. The wind pushed the car slightly from the side, and the sky looked heavier than before. The highway got emptier, and the lights became more spread out. My phone, stuck to the dash with a cheap mount, showed the blue route line moving closer and closer to the town I had tried to erase from my life. The man kept talking. He said he knew I hadn't been back home since I was a teenager. He mentioned a small white house with fading blue shutters, a dead patch of grass in the front yard, and a narrow concrete path leading to a door that never closed properly in winter. He knew my old address. Memories I had buried started to wake up whether I wanted them or not. The fights, the shouting, the sound of my father throwing things when he drank, my little sister crying, then pretending she was fine the next morning. I told myself that a lot of those details could be found online. Old records, old maps, old listings. It was possible. It still did not explain how he knew about my routine now, but my brain clung to any explanation that sounded even slightly normal. Then he said something that cut through every excuse I had been building in my head. He brought up the basement. He described it exactly how it used to be. The narrow staircase, the single naked bulb, the smell of damp concrete. He mentioned the time my little sister got stuck downstairs because the old lock jammed and the door would not open when she pulled it. He said he knew she screamed for help while I stood on the other side of the door, frozen in place, listening. He said I had run away from the door instead of going to get help right away because I was afraid my father would blame me. That part was true. I still hated myself for it. She had not been trapped for long. My father eventually forced the door open when he came home, and she came out shaking and crying. She was physically fine, but something changed in her after that. She became more anxious, more clingy, more afraid of small spaces and of being alone. I never apologized properly. I never even talked about it with her again. Not long after that, my father and I had a huge fight. It turned into something ugly, and I left home as soon as I could. I barely spoke to my family after that. At first it was anger, then it became habit, then it turned into shame. Hearing a complete stranger talk about that basement made my stomach twist. By then, we were already getting close to the exit from my old hometown. I thought about ending the ride. I thought about pretending the car had a problem. But the man in the back seat seemed to be one step ahead of every thought I had. He told me, in that same calm tone, that we were almost there, and that I should just keep going a little longer. He said it like he knew I would obey, and he was right. The exit ramp took us off the highway and onto roads I recognized instantly, even though the buildings had changed. There were new gas stations, new stores, but the shape of the streets was the same. It made me nauseous to see it. The GPS, which had been normal until then, recalculated one last time and showed our final destination, the exact address of my old house. I had not thought about that address in years, but seeing it on the screen felt like someone had reached into my chest and pulled something out. The house looked smaller than I remembered when we finally pulled up. The paint was different, and there were other cars in the driveway. Another family lived there now. The windows were lit, and there was a kid's bike on the front lawn. I stopped across the street. My hands were shaking on the wheel and my heart was pounding in my ears. The man in the back seat shifted slightly. I could feel his eyes on the back of my head. He did not have to tell me what this was about. It was obvious. He wanted me to be there. He wanted me to see what I had run away from. I did not get out of the car. I sat there and stared at the house while the heater hummed and the clock on the dashboard pushed the seconds forward. I started thinking about my sister. I had no idea where she lived now. I had ignored messages from my mother years ago, messages that had her new number. I had told myself it was better that way, that they were all better off without me. The man let the silence stretch and it felt like a weight growing heavier in the car. My chest hurt. My eyes watered, not from sadness at first, but from a kind of raw shame I had been avoiding for so long that I almost forgot it was there. I did not understand who he was or how he knew all of this, but one thing was clear. Somebody had decided I did not deserve to just keep driving in circles around my guilt anymore. After a few long minutes, I couldn't take it. I pulled away from the curb and drove back toward the main road. I did not say anything, and I did not look in the mirror. I dropped the man off at a gas station outside of town. He got out without a word, and when I checked the mirror, he was already gone, walking into the darkness behind the building. When I tried to look at the ride details on the app, there was nothing there. The app showed my last completed trip as the one before his. No Sycamore Road. No long ride. No record. I told myself it was a glitch, some error in the system. I had to tell myself that, because the alternative felt too big and too strange. I drove back to the city in silence and went home. I locked my door twice that night. For a few days, I tried to treat it like a weird dream. I told myself I had imagined certain details, that I was just tired, that maybe I was mixing old memories with a normal ride, but the feeling would not go away. It followed me into every shift, every empty street, every time I passed a basement apartment or an old house with peeling paint. A week later, I did something I should have done years earlier. I looked for my mother online. It wasn't hard. New social media accounts, a profile picture with more gray hair than I remembered, but the same eyes. I stared at her page for almost an hour before sending a simple message. I said it was me, and that I hoped she was okay. She responded within minutes. She told me she had tried to contact me many times. She said she had wanted to tell me that my sister was doing better. She wrote that my sister had gone through therapy for years, and that the incident in the basement had become a central part of those sessions. It had turned into a symbol of feeling abandoned, not just by me, but by the whole family. My mother said my sister had never forgotten me, but she had stopped trying to reach out because it hurt too much when she got no answer. Then my mother wrote something that made everything click into place. She said my sister had once dated a guy who worked in security and investigations. He was the kind of person who enjoyed digging into people's lives, finding patterns, watching from the shadows. She had told that guy everything about our childhood, the house, my father, the basement, me. They had broken up years ago, but my mother remembered him because he had almost crossed some lines with how obsessed he was with background checks and surveillance. She told me my sister had run into him again about 6 months before my strange ride. They had talked briefly, and apparently my sister had mentioned that she still wondered what had happened to me, where I was, if I ever thought about that night. She said she had once made a bitter joke that she wished I could feel trapped and powerless for just a few minutes, so I would understand how she felt. My mother said she had said it in anger and that she regretted it later. But she had no idea what the man might have done with that information. I work in a city where rideshare drivers are easy to track. Our faces, our names, our routes, all of that can be mapped out if someone is patient enough and has the right tools. It would not be that hard for someone with experience to watch my patterns, to learn my habits, to create a fake account, and to request a ride from a dark street like Sycamore Road. He did not need supernatural powers to know my routine. He just needed time, access, and a reason. I will never know for sure if the man in my back seat that night was that same guy, or someone he told the story to, or some other person connected to my sister's past. I never saw his face clearly. I never heard his name. I know this. My sister did not die. She is alive. She lives in another state now, has a small apartment, and works with kids. She still has anxiety, but she is stronger than I ever gave her credit for. Part of me wants to explain everything, that I was scared, that I was young, that I froze. But another part of me knows that explanations do not erase the memory of a locked door and a light that would not turn on. I think the man in the car that night wanted to make sure I remembered what I had done. He wanted to drag my guilt out of the dark and force it into the front seat with me. He succeeded. I still hear phantom knocks on my door some nights around the time I used to come home from my shifts. I know it is probably just the building settling, or my own mind playing tricks on me. But every time I hear it, I think about that ride. I think about my sister in that basement. And I think about the simple truth that I had tried to avoid. You can drive in circles for years, and you can change cities, jobs, and faces. But sooner or later, someone, or something, will hold up a mirror and make you look. Some ghosts are not dead. They are just people you failed, waiting for you to finally remember what you did.